everyone to please take a seat so we can get started. We're going to talk about anatomy of a movement, and I'm going to introduce this really great, amazing, and engaging panel. So please, please, please take your seats. And while you're taking your seats, I will introduce myself. My name is Symone Sanders. I am the strategist for Priorities USA for communications and political outreach. I am also a CNN political commentator, and I am the former National Press Secretary for Senator Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign. And I'm very excited to be here in this room with you today talking about a movement. So they asked me to come up and kind of set the stage for the conversation we're about to have about the resistance movement, different groups that have been moving and activating and resisting since 2017. Some of these groups have been resisting for a very long time, not just since Donald Trump has been elected. And I think when we talk about the anatomy of a movement and we talk about what a movement is, it is really, really important for us to understand the concept of one, intersectionality, and two, inclusion. Because there are people that will tell you that movements work really well when we are all on the same page and we all have one thing that we are organizing around, activating around, resisting around, one thing that we're focused on. We have all come into the room and said, this is just the thing we're going to do. But I would purport to say that the beauty of a movement, movements that work really, really well, are movements that are intersectional, are movements that involve different folks from different strokes, from different spaces and places across our communities, sometimes across the country, that maybe do have varied interests. But at the end, we do have the same shared overall goal, but the way we get there might be a little bit differently. I think that is what makes a movement strong. Inclusion, not just diversity. I know we talk a lot about diversity in the progressive movement. We talk a lot about having different people at the table, different people on the program. We don't talk a lot about making sure different folks and various ideas are included and infused into what we're talking about and what we're doing, are institutionally part of the thing. We don't talk a lot enough about intentional intersectionality. Being intentional about being inclusive, about bringing new people to the table, incorporating new folks' ideas, and creating together, not bringing people to the end so we can have diversity on our program. Not bringing folks in at the end so we can say we went to different communities, but including people at the beginning. So the power of really, really, really strong movements, I believe, are our differences. So our differences could be our socioeconomic background, our differences could be our skin color, our differences could be where we went to school, our differences could be our interactions when it comes to criminal justice reform, police brutality, juvenile justice, the economy, if you're a pipeline fighter. Our differences make up a whole lot of different things, but I really, really, truly believe that our strong movements, our movements can be better if we, one, incorporate intentional intersectionality into what we're doing. Two, focus on being inclusive and not just diverse. And three, understanding that we don't all have to come to the table with the exact same interests, with the exact same goal, that we can have shared goals, we can have an overarching view. Folks can disagree, and we can still get the work done. Is that okay? So those are some of the things we're going to talk about today. Now I want to introduce my panel really quickly because I want to get up here and have a very robust conversation. So with that, I would like to invite, and you all can clap while this happens, our lovely panelists to come to the stage. First, we have Ms. Leni Manaa-Hoppenworth. Clap for Leni. She is with Indivisible. Following her, we have Mrinalini Chakraborty, who is from the Women's March. Keep it on clapping, keep clapping. Clap for Galland from Move On. Next, we have Mr. Mike Breen from the Truman Project. Hello, Mike. Next, we have Nathan Williams from the Town Hall Project. Next, we have Mr. Nick O'Neill from 5 Calls. We're going to hear about 5 Calls. And last but certainly not least, we have Cortney Tunis from Pantsuit Nation. Give this panel a really great round of applause, everybody, as they come to the stage. And we'll just let everybody sit down, and then we'll see if I have a seat. I do have a seat. Perfect. Hello.
Hello.
All right. So y'all heard my little setup, the anatomy of a movement. So I'm just going to go rogue really quick. And before I ask you about resisting and the ways y'all have all resisted since 2017, some of us prior to 2017, because be clear, the resistance is not new. Ooh, Here we go. These chairs are also very fun. The resistance isn't new. And so I would like you first to define what the resistance means to you. I know, right?
Hot seat.
Yeah, go for it.
So the resistance means to me energizing people whose eyes were flung open on November 8th. That there's a part of the resistance that has existed for a long time, and there is a new energy around growing people's participation in the resistance. That someone who previously didn't necessarily think of themselves as an activist or an active participant, they are now a resistor actively.
Anna, you're with Move On. I would purport to say that Move On has been resistant for a really long time on lots of different issues. So what does the resistance mean to you?
So I think of us as being right now in a state of crisis that operates at two levels. We're in a state of acute crisis, and that's what is, I think, as Cortney beautifully said, drawn out so much of the current resistance. We're also in a state, that's the attacks on healthcare, that's the attacks on undocumented folks, it's the ripping up of environmental regulation, it's the fact that we're constantly apparently about to tip into a new hot war. That's the acute crisis. That's what has precipitated, I think, the incredible, historic, unprecedented in our lifetime amount of civic engagement and resistance. Underneath that, there's a level of what I would think of as chronic crisis. And so the people who have been involved for a long time, I think, are both kind of engaged by that acute crisis that's in our faces every day, and the chronic crises, the way in which wealth and economic inequality has spiked in recent years, the ways in which corporations have rigged the economy and democracy in their self-interest, the ways in which white supremacy as a doctrine has just been with us for our entire life, our entire founding as a country, and has been increasingly visible in this period of acute crisis, but it's been there for a long time. So the resistance to me means people turning out to deal with the acute crisis, and part of our job is to ensure that they stay to help engage in the chronic crises that have been with us since the founding of our country.
I love it, I love it. Mike, what does the resistance mean to you? Like, you're over at the Truman Project. One could argue the Truman Project is helping build and fuel the resistance.
One could argue that.
One could argue.
I mean, for us, it really started with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's where a lot of us, I fought in both, came back, we got to do this differently. So we've been in this for 10 years. But I think I want to, very much agree with what's been said about what the resistance is. It's a chronic moment of fear. It's a moment of shock. It's a moment where a lot of people, frankly, a lot of people, look, I'm a cisgendered straight white guy. It's a moment where a lot of people like me have had to sort of say, oh my God, wait a second, right? If I'm not involved, I am consenting to something that I cannot consent to. And so there's been this sense that people are off the fence and motivated by that fear and that shock. But I think the question is, for a lot of us as progressives, we're fundamentally motivated by hope. And so I look at the resistance as an opportunity to stop some truly terrible things. I spend most of my time thinking about war in Iran, war in North Korea, all these horrible things. But I think we've got to ask ourselves, can we seize this opportunity to have some tough conversations, and they're happening, right? And build something bigger. Can we be about something higher that's more long-term, that's the country we all want to live in and build as a generation, and we want to raise our children in 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 years? And I think there's a massive opportunity to do that.
I love it. So, Nathan, in terms of helping build the resistance and giving some infrastructure, if you will, to the resistance, from the view of your work, what does the resistance mean to you, and how are you all participating?
I mean, to me, the resistance is people taking an ownership of the political process, of their government in a new way, that they aren't just listening to marching orders from national leaders or national organizations, that a lot of the energy and creativity is really coming from the ground up. I mean, a lot of what Rafi talked about making sure innovation isn't just going in one direction, but in both directions. We started a Town Hall Project with a very simple idea, which is just these town halls are hard to find. Let's put them on a Google Doc. And we thought it would just a handful of people would be interested, and it turns out tens of thousands of people were interested.
All of America.
And it wasn't like we bought some email list and we started, like, people just found it because the idea was very simple but very good. But the energy is really coming from the ground. People are motivated in a way that I haven't seen in my lifetime. And I think what is incumbent on us is making sure that isn't just a reaction to Trump, that isn't just a reaction to the dangers happening right now. That's something that we have to build for years and decades to come.
That's an interesting point. And so if I may hop on over and speak to Ren from the Women's March, I think you all are a really great example of using the energy from the resistance to create a thing. So talk to me a little bit about what the resistance means to you, and concurrently what the Women's March is doing to continue to fuel and participate in the resistance.
So I loved what you and both Anna said about sort of the fact that the resistance is not new. Communities of color have been leading the resistance for centuries, for decades. But what was really important in that moment, on the darkest hour in our recent collective history, was sort of hundreds of thousands of women rising up in their communities, in their cities, and in their states, and realizing that we needed to put forth a bold vision, right? We said that this is not normal, and we're not gonna allow to make this normal, right? So for me, resistance really means people realizing that there is incredible power when we understand that our liberation is bound to each other, that we can't do this alone. And it's also sort of, am somebody who's, I identify as a democratic socialist, so this looks to me very much as class consciousness, but coming into that moment and realizing that while these, the powers that be have us fighting on the ground for the crumbs, we have literal white supremacists taking over the people's house, right? So coming into that moment and realizing that we're not playing that game. We're not playing the game by the rules that they are prescribing to us. So us taking the power back, redefining what the moment, what January 20th and 21st meant for us, and putting forth a bold vision for what we want our world to look like. So not just resisting, but at the same time, setting the path for what we want this world to look like in the future. So that's what the Women's March is really all about, is creating a safer and more just world where not just the rights of the few, but the rights of all are taken into consideration.
Absolutely. So Leni, you're with Indivisible. Yeah, we can clap for that, we can clap for that. I'm all about crowd participation. And don't worry, we will have an opportunity for at least 2 questions before the end of this panel. So in terms of Indivisible, Indivisible has definitely taken up the mantle of the resistance in terms of talking to, speaking with, and holding accountable our elected officials. And so talk to me a little bit about, from the Indivisible's point of view, what does the resistance mean to you all, and how are you actively resisting?
So Indivisible is everyone in this room. So if you are in Indivisible, raise your hand. We are everywhere. We are coming out. We are resisting every single proposal that they put out. Trump's executive orders from last week will not stand for that. We stand with many of you here. We cannot do this alone. Resistance is us. The resistance is me, someone who was not political before November last year. I can't believe it's already been a year. And we've done so much. We've resisted the original Muslim ban. We pushed back on their ACA repeal twice. And we stood up against white supremacy together. And we will continue to do so every single step of the way, because we have found our voice. And it's not just about resisting, it's about saying what is wrong and what we want. We need to move forward, because even if Trump is not in office, we still need to exist. And we need to find our power. And like my representative, Jan Schakowsky, always says, when we fight, we win. So when we fight, we win.
I love it. So Nick, I really love 5 calls, and please feel free to tell everybody about what 5 calls is. But when we talk about the resistance, there have been lots of, groups like Indivisible who are pushing folks to, show up at town halls, thanks to people like the Town Hall Project, and make calls. But making calls is really, really important, and it's one of the best ways to affect your representatives. So talk to me a little bit about what resistance means to you in terms of what you all are doing at 5 calls.
So I think it's super important, and the role I think we play right now is that it's important for us to keep people involved in what's going on, right? We're a fairly new group, but obviously people like Move On understand the importance of making sure people are understanding what's going on and don't feel like everything's being normalized and they just accept what's going on, right? There are a lot of people who you can make a terrible decision in the presidency, you could write a terrible EO, and maybe it wouldn't affect your day-to-day life, right? But keeping those people involved in what the process is and making sure they're calling people is a huge part of making sure that we don't just give in to what's coming here, right? So what we're doing is we're having people call about specific issues that they care a lot about, right? We go to 5 calls, we don't say, here's this one thing that you have to call about today. We say, here's a list of things, pick one thing that's super important for you today and make your calls on that. And so beyond that, what we're doing is sort of onboarding people into more and more complex and interactive things that they can do, right? So now you can call voters for specific candidates for the Virginia House delegate race, right? Like taking people, giving them that first step, getting them involved where they get that feedback loop and they understand that what they're doing is making a difference, and then they can say, oh, I'm gonna make calls for a candidate, and then they can say, oh, I'm gonna go to a town hall, right? Riding up that ladder of engagement until you get them so hooked on the process that they're never gonna leave.
You gotta bait them in and then hook them down, okay?
Exactly.
That is what 5 calls is doing. So 2018 is here, I believe. I don't think it's just around the corner. It is right here, it's right now. The things that are happening right now are going to affect what is happening and what will happen in 2018 electorally. So together, you all command so many eyeballs. You are doing so much work, and 2018, like I just said, is here. So what are you all doing to work together to focus that energy and those eyeballs? And concurrently, how are you making that work intersectional? Who wants to start?
I can start.
Please.
So
Pantsuit Nation.
Pantsuit Nation, and we've got 3.8 million people in our Facebook group, which is an incredible amount of eyes. And all of what the rest of the panel is doing are creating amazing tools and amazing actions, and we are sharing those things, but we're sharing them in confluence with stories. People talking about why that issue matters. So maybe I'm not affected by the transgender military ban, but I can get pissed off on behalf of someone else and make a phone call about it. So what we are doing in the lead up to the 2018 election is making sure that people become acclimated to getting riled up, making calls, showing up at town halls, showing up at marches, so that when it comes time to vote, that it's as common as going to pick up a cup of coffee or order your groceries online. That this is no longer something that you do on just one day of the year, that it's something that you wake up every morning and you think about, okay, who am I gonna talk to today? What's my action?
I love it. Anna, please.
Yeah, I think this is such a good prompt because the core question of our moment is how we are going to electoralize our resistance and our organizing in this year, this incredible, historic in our lifetime spike of civic engagement and energy. How are we going to march to the polls? And how are we going to do that with open arms so we can bring others with us no matter where they are on their political journey, right? So it's the right question. I do think we're seeing a really inspiring thing happening that I want to speak about briefly, and then I want to go to the thing that you said, I think, beautifully, which is that we need to have a hopeful vision. We're not just against, we're for. Right. So the inspiring thing that I think I see happening is a level of partnership across institutional issue and constituency borders that I haven't seen in my organizer lifetime. Yeah. So some examples of that, Move On partnered with Lin-Manuel Miranda. He's not an organization, he's an individual. He's an incredible individual and raised $3.5 million for Puerto Rico relief in order to step into the gap that the president and this administration have left. But that's a partnership that didn't exist last year, it existed now. We're seeing organizations, Move On, People's Action, Indivisible, Women's March, many others, partner on a series of Sunday night conference calls. Did anyone happen to join a conference call sometime in the last year? So this is, conference calls are kind of an old school technology. But they met a need in the moment to go deeper on our analysis of this moment and what we can each do in our local community. So probably a dozen or 20 different organizations partnered on those conference calls, and we broke the Guinness Book of World Records for the single biggest conference call because everyone was pulling together in one direction, right? And then I think the final example I want to share is just around healthcare. Organizations here and elsewhere partnered together at scale in order to make something that seemed impossible on day one inevitable. We beat back the effort to take away healthcare from tens of millions of Americans, and we only did it because we worked together, resolutely, with hope, with vision, with common purpose. So we've worked together across those boundaries. We got to keep that kind of creative partnership, that kind of low ego partnership spirit together as we march into 2018. So in 2018, what we're going to do is prioritize the House. We think we need to end GOP control of the House of Representatives. Full stop. We are also going to be working down ballot in some key areas. Move on will be. More on this to come. But I think that if we don't put a check on Trump and the GOP's power at the federal level in the form of control of one house of Congress, we're in a tough spot, let's just say, heading towards 2020. We need to get out of that acute crisis so we can deal with the undergirding crises. And you asked so many questions in that one prompt, Symone.
I did. I like to pack them in there. How is your work going to be intersectional?
Yeah, well, it has to start there. It has to be there. So intersectionality, as I understand it, like my own language for it, people speak to this beautifully in their own ways, means that we understand that systems of oppression as they show up in society in which certain categories of people are privileged over others for no good reason, just for social constructs, that those patterns of oppression intersect and compound. So mostly, like the shortest hand version I have of this is like listen to black women, basically.
That's why I'm the moderator today, ladies and gentlemen.
That's right.
I love it. So I think, Nathan, town halls are going to be a really important part of what's happening in 2018. One could hope. There's some folks that don't like to do town halls. So how are you and the Town Hall Project planning to work with some of these other groups here on the panel, other people who are out here in this space, and how is your work going to be intersectional? Like, what are your plans for 2018?
So yeah, I mean, I think in 2017, we've seen over the last few months really amazing collaboration between all the groups on this panel, a lot of the groups who you've seen will yet to see. And there's a lot to work out in terms of 2018. I think the real challenge is the individuals in these communities, in these districts, helping them understand how, I mean, you've got someone who's a member of Indivisible, who marches, who's on, a member of Move On, is part of Pantsuit Nation, makes calls, goes to town halls, they do all these things, and they're going to be communicated with their state rep candidate, their congressional candidate, and all these things are going to be coming at them at once. And I think helping people understand like how I can have an impact and not feel torn. Because I talk to a lot of people who aren't activists and aren't normally politically engaged, and they want to do something really badly, but they are still confused to a degree. They still feel, what's the most important thing I can do? Because, I mean, this house is on fire in so many different rooms. So, and I think finding a way to communicate to them, it's like, you don't have to pick the most important thing. It's pick the thing that matters most to you. And that's something we're honestly talking about at Town Hall Project, about how to, we want to mobilize people to town halls, but we don't want to see everything through a town hall colored lens. And figuring out how to communicate that to our supporters.
I love it. The Truman Project, what are you all's plans for 2018? The current president of the United States, one could argue he's been very problematic this week when it comes to the military. It's my diplomatic way of putting it for the folks in this room.
More diplomatic than I'd think.
Thank you. So what are you all's plans for 2018, and how do you plan to fit into this space, and do you have some real-time response to the president as it comes up and is in your wheelhouse?
I mean, it's an interesting, so our challenge has always been, foreign policy, national security, war and peace, they don't function politically the same way that a lot of other issues function. And we're all, in some way, healthcare experts, education experts, because we've been sick and we've gone to school and we live these things. There's unfortunately right now, a tiny minority of people in our society who have a direct experience with war, despite us fighting the longest wars in our history. And so that creates political issues. It makes it easy for people like the president to, first of all, use the military in frankly, disgusting ways as a political shield on, I mean, not just scaring people to vote for him, but now it's the national security threat is your neighbor who looks different from you and prays to a different God. And when people kneel for black lives, they're offending soldiers. I was a soldier. That is absurd. That is not how this works, right? Protest is patriotic. It's not how this works. And so for us, I think as we look at 2018, we're thinking about really two things broadly. The first is, how do we provide the largest possible base of resources and training and support so progressives can be comfortable contesting this issue of how do you keep a family safe in America without giving up our values, without giving into the fear frame that the other side wants to use. And so we've made big investments in training and in public engagement and in outreach to groups that we haven't always worked with in the past because of the narrowness of the issue set, which is unfortunate, but this is a moment for that. So we're here to be a resource for every campaign at every level, every candidate at every level, every movement at every level. If you need that support, we have daily messaging products. We have a great new director of training and public engagement, the great Anthony Robinson, the very handsome former Marine who's somewhere in the room, who would love to work with me. So he is literally here to meet everyone and to provide those resources. And the second thing we want to do is we want to take every opportunity, and we've been doing this, but this is a moment that really requires it, to shift the American view of what our heroes who defend us look like. So if you want to show me a decorated Marine combat veteran, that's great. I'm going to put a woman of color on stage with her wife.
There you go.
That's
there you go.
who's defending you, right? That's where that is the source of your safety. So how can that also be the source of your fear? We've got to get people around this evolution. Military officers, decorated military officers who are bearded and turbaned Sikhs, who fought in Iraq, who, half the population is in fear of this man, and he is literally defending you with his life. So we've got to introduce Americans to their real heroes.
I love it. Y'all give a round of applause for the Truman Project. Very intersectional. So Breen, what is the Women's March doing in 2018? I hear you guys have some kind of conference or something like that that's coming up.
Which you're coming to,
Which
right?
I'm coming to. So tell us more about that, and then what are the Women's March's plans for 2018?
Okay, so there's a lot there. So it's interesting, you all spoke beautifully about intersectionality. When the Women's March came together as a vision, we used intersectionality not just as this really cool new intangible concept, it's the actual framework and foundation of our work, right? And it has to be. And to us, millions of women and femmes and allies are looking to us to sort of tell them, and especially folks who are engaged for the first time, is that why and how they should approach these really complex issues. When we're talking about healthcare, for example, which is a battle that I'm so proud that we work together to win, not once, not twice, thrice, right? But even in the healthcare the assault on the ACA, we were framing it in terms of, we have to center the voices of the most marginalized communities at the core of our work, and that is how our work is powerful, right? So we have a large base who are waiting and looking up to us in many ways to help frame those issues, tell them how it is that they should approach these battles that we are fighting. So a lot of our work has been on civic engagement and engaging our base. We're also building out really strong chapters. So at this moment, the Women's March has not only 50 state coverage, but we also have really strong chapters in over 25 states where we have state leaders and a solid volunteer base where folks are engaged in local elections. They are fighting the local fights in terms of organizing marches, rallies, rapid responses. And these are, it's interesting when we were organizing the march, the press would always ask us, wow, like hundreds of thousands of people are coming. Wouldn't it be so amazing if all of these women vote in the 2018 elections? And I'm like, first of all, these people, I truly believe the people who marched and came out to the streets with that much passion, they were already engaged in the political, in the electoral process. But these are not just voters. These are people who are going to get the vote out, right? So that's how we are approaching the 2018 election, these are the people that were galvanized by the Women's March. These are the people who are going to make a tangible difference in the local election by fueling the energy of our movement into, supporting candidates that run on issues that are important to us. By supporting causes, hitting the streets when we need to. So those are some of the things that we're working on.
It sounds amazing. So for a lot of this work that the Women's March and Pantsuit Nation and other folks have described, and we'll hear from Indivisible in a second, but Nick, that work will also require, they're going to ask people to make phone calls.
Absolutely.
So what is 5 calls planned for 2018, and how are you planning to work with these groups, and how are you already working with some of the folks on the stage?
We heard a lot this morning about how we need to connect the tools that we have with the people who are out there doing advocacy, right? And we've made almost 2 million calls just from 5 calls alone, but even that's not.
How many calls? How many calls?
Almost 2 million.
Oh, that's a lot of calls.
That is a lot of calls. But it's not enough, right? Like, we can only cover so much important outrage nationally on our page as, we can understand and write up, right? If you give people too many options, then they just, like, you don't pay attention to anything, right? So what we want to do is we want to give this sort of a tool to people like Indivisible groups who have a strong idea of what's going on in their local community and can affect change at that level, right? And then give these sorts of tools to candidates, even, from school board up until, congressional candidates, so that they can connect with the people who are in their districts and care about their specific issues and really sort of drive this thing based on what the individual cares about in the individual area, as opposed to just the things that you should be paying attention to nationally.
Perfect. So, Leni, what is Indivisible going to be up to in 2018? I know there are races and elections coming up that we will all be paying attention to for the midterms, but what Indivisible has been really, really good about, I think, is holding folks accountable on what's happening right now in terms of legislation. And so we'll potentially have a budget, we'll potentially have tax reform, they might try to repeal and replace Obamacare yet again, and who else knows what's going to come down the pipeline. So what is Indivisible going to be up to in 2018? Because it seems like you all are kind of ground zero on all fronts.
Well, there is a lot to do. I love this theme that's going around on this panel right now, which is that politics is local. I mean, we need to actually talk to our neighbors who live right next door to us. I don't know your politics, but I would like to know you. We need to get people to reach out to their friends to get them to an event. Maybe if they come to an event, they'll come to a meeting. If they come to a meeting, maybe they'll form a subcommittee of some kind that's interesting to them. And then eventually maybe they'll be a leader of their group. Who knows? From there, maybe they'll eventually run for a school board. We need to get them on that trajectory to be a leader in their community. So that's what we're really looking to get people to not only engage online, because it's been very powerful, and we need to do those things, and we need to make them do phone calls as well. But how about actually making those phone calls together, like in a phone bank, where we can talk to each other and socialize and engage, and we need to do that more regularly, because that's how we're going to win. We're going to win by having conversations, normal conversations with our friends and families about what's important to us, and then taking that to our representative and saying, this is what's important to me, not just only to me, but my community, and I represent my community. I'm standing before you here, but I represent my community, which is, they don't know how many people you represent, but you represent your neighborhood or your city, or for instance, Indivisible, Illinois. When I stand in front of a representative, I'm standing for all of you there. So we all have to capture that power and to embrace it and to know that that is how we're going to win, and using all of the resources that we have available.
That's right. I love it. You touched on online organizing. On the left, we have not done a really great job about capitalizing on this online space. Republicans have outspent Democrats 5-1 when it comes to digital advertising. And I still think it's a new area, if you will, in terms of getting people to come out. How do you translate online activism to actually people turning up at the polls, or actually people making these phone calls? Someone can retweet and like, but is there an action that follows that? Priorities USA, and my colleague Tristan Wilkerson is out here in the audience somewhere. Wave your hand, Tristan. We just recently partnered with Color of Change to do a deep dive research project on African American millennials. And that research project, which is composed of focus groups and then the national survey poll, will inform how we engage in a digital strategy in 2018, particularly around a very important demographic, African American millennials, for the Democratic base. And so what is the relationship between online organizing, online activism, and actual digital advertising? And how can we better capitalize on that use of this in this space? I'd like to start with Move On, because I think Move On, and I say that because Move On has been, I mean, we talk about it being a fairly new phenomenon, but Move On has been in this space for a really long time.
20 years old
20 years, using email, capitalizing on social media. When we say social media, I want y'all to know it's just not Facebook and Twitter. Like, we're talking about Google ads, we're talking about Tumblr, I'm talking about where people get their news on Instagram. So it's a very vast space, so if you could touch on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. So I just read a book called Twitter and Tear Gas by Zeynep Tufekci, I think is the last name. She's totally brilliant, and it included a line which she was quoting from someone else. I encourage you to read it. It's just really interesting in terms of how we're going to build our power using the new hyper-networked kind of society that we live in, how we're going to use those tools, and yet how we also need to be building our institutions to actually build power. Like, using Twitter is an excellent and important aspect of how we're going to manifest our visible opposition, and we can't end with those demonstrations. We have to be building our institutions. So I encourage you. Anyway, she had a line in there that she quoted, which was, technology is neither positive nor negative, but neither is it neutral, which I really thought was powerful. It changes the game in important ways. It's not good or bad, but it is something different and new, and we need to be super smart on how we're leveraging the full spectrum of technical tools for individual level activism, for group level activism, and for organizational level activism. So that to me means Move On, in addition to having a big and now comparatively quite old email list of millions of people who organize together on all sorts of things, who generate 500,000 calls on healthcare, who hit the streets, who march, who turn out to vote, who raise funds for candidates and causes we believe in. We do all those things with email, and we now have a video channel. We produced our own in-house videos, hundreds of them in the last year. We had 300 million views of Move On produced videos in the 14 months since we launched our in-house video lab. That's actually, we had a wonderful Move On member, one of many, just write in one day and be like, I love your channel. And I thought, we don't have it. Oh, yeah, we do. We have a channel. So we need to be using and developing tools to both do that kind of broadcast work to share our messages across and out into the various circuits that people operate in. We need to be developing tools that help people connect to each other and take action locally in networked ways. And we need to be ensuring that the sum total of all of those tools and techniques, broadcast, peer-to-peer, et cetera, are rolling up to people having authentic conversations about values and a vision of a new inclusive populist future that we can and must be building towards.
Absolutely. So Cortney, in terms of, I mean, Pantsuit Nation was a Facebook group, okay?
Yeah, it still is.
So it still is a Facebook group. And so, some would argue, some people are questioning now, is online activism really better than in the streets activism? What would you say?
I would say that suggesting that you can pull the two apart is silly. That online activism is what is creating communities that are then creating new communities and creating new communities. Pantsuit Nation has millions of people that have splintered off and created new on-the-ground organizations, or given spaces to people who feel alone in their maybe very red place, giving them hope because they have a community to go to talk to. So there really are one and the same. But the critical piece is making the tools available at the time when someone is ready to move offline. That it can't just be a
Tools
space.
like 5 Calls
Exactly.
or the Town Hall Project.
We shout out these people all the time, and we push them out to the group, because when you read a story that impacts you, or when you have a particularly important conversation in a comment set and you're ready to take action, you need to have easy access to then be able to do that, whether that's to sign up to go to a march or make a call. But the other piece is that there is an important part of the online activism that has to do with the feedback loop and making sure that people are getting information about how their actions are impacting. And so I feel like we have a really good opportunity online to say to people, this is how many of you have done this is the impact of this, and the online tool is a really great place to do that.
Talk to me about the feedback loop, Breen and Leni. What successes have you seen with the Women's March and Indivisible? And does it make people want to be more engaged when you can actively communicate to them how they have helped make a difference, or the magnitude of their participation in online or actual in-the-street activism?
Oh, absolutely. And most of our work has been, focused on distributed actions, in partnership with Move On, Indivisible, and, several other folks who also have large bases. And, since the Women's March, we have never stopped hitting the streets. And every single time you would think that some people might want you to believe that the energy is dying down. I just think we're getting stronger and stronger as a movement, because I see the same people turning up for different causes. The same people who came out for healthcare when healthcare was under attack also came out for when DACA was under attack. And it's sort of when they're seeing that now we're carrying the biggest feedback, we give back to our community, and I see it resonating, is that people are becoming sort of, aware of how all of these issues interact with each other and intersect with each other.
Leni, are you seeing the same thing with Indivisible?
So for the feedback for us is winning. So every time we win.
Very clear.
And also the photos that we show up, we take a picture. I'm going to take a picture of you guys before we get off the stage. Because if we didn't take a picture, then it didn't happen.
That's right.
So we have evidence. And with that, we show our representatives that we are showing up, and we are making a difference, and we are winning, and we will vote in 2018.
I will add that there's an online component of social FOMO, that if we can create
fear of missing out, for anybody that isn't here on the acronym.
You can get people to want to be participating in that by tagging, the same kinds of things that get people to want to go to that restaurant to eat that.
I love it.
I think
We're
that's
gonna
absolutely.
chime in. Well, as we're chiming in, I would like the little mic cubes to come out, and then tell me about the Truman Project.
I was just going to say that I think there's a really powerful feedback loop between physical action, physical politics, which cannot be lost, and the online piece. And where we saw this most powerfully, we're not a large mass movement organization. We're a relatively small organization of policy and experienced field people in the national security
But
world.
everybody knows who you are, Mike. Everybody knows who you are.
I guess they do now. Thanks to you. I'm sitting here with you, so they do now. But the thing I'm most proud of in the past year is not a policy thing. It's that when the Muslim ban came down, hundreds of our members were at all the points of entry, all the airports, on their own. The organizing happened afterward. Practicing law from baggage claim, holding a sign, getting in the media saying, I'm a veteran, this is not the America I fought for.
Wow.
But that produced a social media thing, which became an AP story, which started to feed this narrative that the military is against the Muslim ban. But it was the physical presence of those people who came without being asked mostly that mattered. And I think that's a product of a community that was built long before the emergency, people of trust that knew what their values were and showed up. And so I think we're in this beautiful feedback loop in a lot of ways. The times we're living in are terrifying. But we are building an unbelievable community, and a community that is, I think critically is prepared to leave the online space and place their bodies where their values are.
I love it.
Right.
One thing
I love it. Hold on. Do I have a let me get a crowd question in, because they are going to cut me off, and then I'm going to come back to the panel for final comments. Do I have a mic cube? And we have a mic. All right, sir. Please tell us your name and what is your question.
Hi, Cameron Davis of the Democratic Party of Evanston. You all have talked about, as I understand it, intersectionality as it relates to working with different organizations. One of the things that we're all trying to juggle too is the intersectionality of issue-based advocacy with institution building. And I'm wondering what advice you have for people here in the room who are working in the streets and on the ground on that front.
All right. Issue-based advocacy with institution building. I'll take two folks to answer this question. Ren, go ahead.
I think, in a short time frame, we have to look beyond coalition building from a transactional perspective to real, actual bonds that we are building with each other, right? So a lot of times we approach coalition building from a very transactional perspective, like I show up for your thing so that you show up for my thing. And we gotta get beyond that. We have to really embrace this ideology that we are in this fight together, and whether that's institutions, peoples, communities showing up for each other, because we cannot win this alone. And the job of the people in power is to divide and split up our communities and pit us against each other. So we gotta get ahead of that.
Absolutely. You want to chime in on that, Hannah?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think we are building towards a country where everyone is set up to thrive. We are building towards a country where there's a place of honor and dignity for everyone, We are building towards a future, right? Not just for our country, but for our world. One that is marked by justice and sustainability and equity and hope and care for each other. Like, that is the big picture of what we are building towards. And we, as people who believe in a country where everyone can be set up to thrive and doesn't believe it's a zero-sum game with a better, bargain by winners and losers, but that we're all in it together, that fundamentally we only thrive if we understand and operate from the place of all of our collective future being bound up together. Only if we operate from that place will we win. So I think the issue coalitions that we build need to periodically remind ourselves of that fact, of that bigger positive vision of what we're building towards together.
Thank you. We are out of time, but I want to give my panel final comments. I want everybody to give me 10 seconds. Give me one thing you want to leave with the audience today. Either how can they join your movement? What do you want them to know about what you have going on? Give me one thing. Cortney.
Keep telling your story about why issues are important to you, because stories are the things that move the needle on all of these issues.
Thank you, Nick.
I'm dead serious about offering the tools that Five Calls has to campaigns and advocacy organizations. Nick at fivecalls.org.
Nathan.
Continue to hold lawmakers accountable if they're not accessible. If candidates are not accessible, call them out. That's going to be our big focus in 2018.
Mike.
We're here to help and be a resource. It's free, and there are Senate fights coming on Iran that will seem esoteric and pointless, and they are the prelude to war if we don't win. We need your help.
Anna.
We need to resist and we need to win. We also need to be ready for the predictable emergency, which is the moment where some sort of attack in the US is used as a pretext to escalate all the attacks on our communities and overseas. MoveOn and a bunch of partners have been working on that problem, so make sure you're on MoveOn's list, on our text list, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, to get plugged into that emergency first responders network that we're building now.
Perfect. Ren.
We need to wake up every morning and remind ourselves that we were not outsmarted, we were out-organized, and we are going to change that if that's the last thing we do.
Lenny.
We need to remember that we have the power to win. And not only that, if we grab 5 other friends, then we will win quicker. So let's be efficient about this. And all of these folks on stage and everybody here this weekend are going to help us do that.
Absolutely. And the last thing I'll leave you all with is we talk about the anatomy of a movement. Think about what part of the body, what part of our movement is the strongest, and what part of our movement needs some additional strengthening. We'll leave you with that. Give this panel a round of applause. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And
Okay, can we take a selfie?
we'll see you
I
next
really
time.
want to. Ready?
Let's do it. Are you doing it? And do you want to do? We're doing this.